What if I told you a basement was discovered in a house that officially never had one, and just hours later, it vanished without a trace? Police went inside. They found someone who had been missing for years. They heard whispers behind a locked door. But when they came back, the basement was gone. No stairs, no room, no evidence. So the question is, if it never existed, then who or what is still down there? The call came in just after sunrise at 6:12 a.m. It was a quiet morning in the small town, the kind where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. The streets were still, and most people were just beginning their day. But the dispatcher's voice carried a hint of urgency that didn't go unnoticed. A neighbor from Ashwood Lane had reported a strange smell coming from the old house at the end of the street. At first, it didn't seem like a serious concern. The house had been abandoned for years. People often complained about odd smells, especially during warmer months when something might rot unnoticed. But there was something different about this call. The neighbor sounded scared. 2 officers were sent to check it out. When they arrived, the house stood exactly as expected, quiet, still, and forgotten. It was a 2-story building with faded paint peeling off the walls. The windows were covered in dust, and the front yard was overgrown with tall weeds that swayed gently in the morning breeze. But something immediately caught their attention. The front door was slightly open, not wide open, just enough to notice. The officers exchanged a quick look. Someone could be inside. One of them said quietly. They approached the door carefully. One officer placed a hand on it and pushed it open slowly. The hinges creaked loudly, breaking the silence of the street. Inside, the air felt heavy. There was a smell, but it wasn't just the typical scent of decay you'd expect from an abandoned house. It was sharper, more unsettling, something that didn't belong. The officers stepped inside. Dust covered nearly every surface. The floor creaked under their boots as they moved through the living room. An old couch sat against the wall, its fabric torn and faded. A broken lamp lay on the floor beside it. Everything looked untouched for years, but the silence inside the house felt wrong. Too complete, too still. They moved further in, checking each room carefully. The kitchen was in worse shape. Rust covered the sink, and the cabinets hung loosely from the walls. The refrigerator door was slightly open, revealing darkness inside. One officer gently pushed it closed. Neither of them spoke much. There was an unspoken tension between them, the kind that builds when something doesn't feel right, but you can't explain why. Then, as they stepped back into the hallway, one of them froze. Wait. The other officer turned. What is it? He pointed down at the floor. Footprints, clear as day. They stood out against the thick layer of dust, leading from the front door deeper into the house. Fresh footprints, the kind that couldn't have been there for more than a day. The officers crouched down, examining them closely. They're recent, one said, and only one set. The other added that meant someone had walked in, but there were no footprints leading back out. A cold feeling settled over them. They followed the trail slowly, step by step, deeper into the hallway. The footprints moved in a straight line, as if the person had known exactly where they were going. They passed 2 empty rooms. A broken bathroom, a closet with its door hanging open, and then the footprints stopped, right in front of a door at the end of the hallway. The basement door, it looked older than the rest of the house. The wood was darker, worn down at the edges. A heavy lock was attached to it, newer than anything else around it. The officers stood still for a moment, staring at it. This wasn't here before. One of them said quietly, "You've been here before." The other asked, "Years ago, routine check. I don't remember a basement." The silence returned, thicker now. One officer reached out and tried the handle. It didn't move, locked. He stepped back slightly, then, without warning, a sound. Both officers froze instantly. It came from the other side of the door, faint, soft, like something shifting in the dark. They looked at each other, their expressions tense. "Did you hear that?" One whispered, the other nodded slowly. Another sound followed, this time clearer, a quiet scrape, then silence again. The air in the hallway seemed to grow colder. One officer leaned closer to the door, holding his breath as he listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then a whisper, so faint it almost didn't feel real, but it was there, coming from below. The officer stepped back quickly. "We need backup," he said, his voice low but firm. The other officer didn't argue. As they moved away from the door, neither of them took their eyes off it. It stood there, still and silent once again, as if nothing had happened. But they both knew better. Because whatever was behind that door, it wasn't supposed to be there. Backup arrived in less than 10 minutes, though it felt much longer. The quiet street of Ashwood Lane was no longer empty. 2 patrol cars sat outside the house, their engines still running. A third unit pulled up moments later. The flashing lights reflected faintly against the dusty windows of the abandoned home, giving it a strange, almost watchful appearance. Inside, the 2 original officers stood near the end of the hallway, keeping their distance from the basement door. Neither of them had spoken much since the whisper. It wasn't just the sound, it was the feeling that came with it. Something neither of them could explain, but both clearly understood. When the backup officers entered, the tension in the house became obvious immediately. "What's going on?" one of them asked. The first officer pointed toward the door. "We heard something from down there. Someone's inside. We don't know." A brief silence followed. Then one of the backup officers stepped forward, studying the door carefully. His eyes moved over the frame, the lock, the hinges. "This lock is new," he said. "Doesn't match the rest of the place." "That's what we thought." Another officer knelt down and examined the floor. "Footprints lead here," he confirmed, "fresh." The group exchanged looks. No one said it out loud, but they were all thinking the same thing. Someone had gone down there and hadn't come back up. "All right," one of them said finally, "let's open it." They didn't waste time. One officer positioned himself near the handle, while another stepped back and raised his boot. With a sharp air, he kicked near the lock. The wood cracked but held again. A louder uduaya this time. The lock loosened. On the third uduaya, the door finally gave way with a loud snap, swinging open just enough to reveal darkness beyond. A cold rush of air spilled out from below. It carried a damp, heavy smell that filled the hallway almost instantly. Not just decay, but something deeper, something that felt wrong. One officer covered his nose slightly. "That's not normal." No one disagreed. They shone their flashlights down the opening. A staircase came into view. Narrow, steep, and disappearing into complete darkness. "Lights don't work," someone asked. One officer reached for the switch near the door and flipped it. "Nothing, only the soft hum of silence," answered. "Flashlights only," the lead officer said. He took the first step down. The wood creaked under his weight. The others followed closely behind, moving slowly, carefully. Each step echoed faintly in the confined space, as if the staircase stretched deeper than it should. The walls around them felt tight, almost too close. The air grew colder with every step, and the smell became stronger. About halfway down, one officer stopped. "Wait." The group paused. "What is it?" He lowered his flashlight toward the steps beneath them. "Look at this." The beam of light revealed something strange. The wood of the stairs had changed. The top half had been old, worn, dusty, matching the house above. But here, the wood looked newer, cleaner, almost recently installed. The line between the old and the new was clear, like 2 different staircases had been joined together. "That doesn't make sense," one officer said. "This whole place doesn't make sense," another replied. They continued down. The lower they went, the quieter it became. Even their own breathing seemed too loud now. Then finally they reached the bottom. The staircase ended abruptly on a smooth concrete floor. The room they stepped into was unlike anything they expected. It wasn't an old basement. It looked constructed, deliberately. The walls were made of solid concrete, smooth and even, as if poured with precision. There were no cracks, no signs of aging. The floor was clean, too clean. No dust, no debris. No signs that this place had been abandoned at all. The officers spread out slightly, scanning the area with their flashlights. "This isn't part of the original house," one said quietly. "It can't be," another agreed. "There's no record of this." The room itself was empty, no furniture. No objects, nothing except a door. On the far side of the room stood a large metal door. It was heavy, industrial, looking completely out of place in a house like this. And it was locked from the outside. The officers slowly approached it. Each step echoed faintly against the concrete floor. The closer they got, the stronger that strange feeling returned. The same one they felt upstairs, but now more intense. Like they were not alone. One officer reached the door and placed his hand on the cold metal surface. It was freezing, far colder than the surrounding air. He looked back at the others. You feel that? They nodded. Another officer stepped closer, examining the lock. No rust, nowhere this thing is used. Recently. Looks like it. Silence fell over the room again. Then that sound, all of them heard it this time. Clear and loud from the metal door. Like someone shifted their weight, the officers grew intense. There was someone up there. One whispered. Another raised his flashlight, aimed at the door as if it might somehow see through. Stay ready, the lead officer said quietly. He reached for the handle. His hand paused just inches away. For a moment, everything was completely still. Then a whisper, soft, weak, but unmistakable, from the other side. The officer's hand tightened, and slowly he turned the handle. The metal handle turned with a dull, heavy click. For a moment, no one moved. All the officers stood still, their eyes fixed on the door, their flashlights steady but their hands tense. The faint whisper they had heard seconds ago seemed to linger in the air, as if it had never fully stopped. "Open it," the lead officer said quietly. The officer closest to the door nodded once. He pulled. The metal door resisted at first, as if something on the other side didn't want to let go. Then, with a slow, dragging creak, it began to open. The sound echoed through the concrete room. Inside, there was darkness. Not just the absence of light, but a heavy, suffocating darkness that seemed to absorb everything around it. The officers raised their flashlights and stepped closer. The beams cut through the dark, revealing a small room. Bare, silent, and wrong. The walls were the same smooth concrete, but closer together. The space felt tight, almost suffocating. A single dim bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly as if it could go out at any moment. On the floor lay a thin mattress. Stained, worn, and in the far corner someone was sitting. The figure didn't move at first. It was hunched over, knees pulled close to the chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Long, unkempt hair covered most of the face. For a second, the officers thought they might be too late. Then the figure shifted, slowly, painfully. The officers froze. "Hey!" One of them called out, his voice echoing slightly in the small room. "Can you hear me?" No response. The figure's head lifted just a little. A pair of eyes caught the light. Wide, unfocused, like they weren't sure what they were seeing. The officers stepped inside cautiously. "It's okay," another officer said, softer this time. "We're here to help." The figure blinked several times as if trying to adjust to the light. Then, in a weak, barely audible voice, he spoke. "You came back." The words sent a chill through the room. "No," the officer replied gently. "We're not who you think. We're police." The young man stared at them, confused. His lips trembled slightly, as if he was trying to say something else but couldn't find the strength. Up close, his condition was clear. He was extremely thin. His skin looked pale, almost gray under the harsh light. There were marks on his arms, faint bruises, some older, some newer. His clothes were dirty, hanging loosely on his body. "How long have you been down here?" one officer asked. The young man didn't answer. Instead, he looked past them. Toward the open door, his expression changed instantly. Fear, raw, unmistakable fear. "He's not gone," he whispered. The officers exchanged quick glances. "Who?" the lead officer asked, but the young man shook his head, pulling himself tighter into the corner. "He watches," he said. "He always watches." "Who does?" another officer pressed. Still, no answer. The lead officer made a quick decision. "We need to get him out of here now." Two officers carefully approached the young man. He flinched at first, shrinking away from their touch, but he didn't resist. "It's okay," one of them reassured him. "You're safe now." They helped him to his feet. He struggled to stand, his legs weak from what must have been years of confinement. One officer supported him from the side while another stayed close behind. As they guided him toward the door, one officer stayed behind for a moment. Something had caught his attention, the walls. Up close, they weren't as smooth as they had seemed at first. There were markings, dozens of them, scratched into the concrete with something sharp. He stepped closer, raising his flashlight. Dates, rows and rows of dates, some written neatly, others rushed, uneven, almost desperate. He scanned them quickly. 2019, 2020, 2021. That made sense, but then he paused. 1987. His brow furrowed. He moved the light further across the wall. More dates, older ones, 1974, 1962. His confusion deepened. That's not possible, he muttered under his breath. The house itself wasn't even that old. Another officer noticed his reaction. What is it? These dates, he said, pointing. They go back decades before this place even existed. The other officer stared at the wall, equally confused. Maybe someone wrote them later. Why would they write dates from before the house was built? Neither of them had an answer. From across the room, the rescued man suddenly spoke again, his voice weak but urgent. Don't read them. Both officers turned toward him. His eyes were wide, filled with panic. He doesn't like that, he said. A heavy silence filled the space. The officer near the wall hesitated, then slowly stepped back. All right, he said quietly, we're leaving. They didn't question it. Something about the way the young man said those words, something real, something terrified, was enough. They moved quickly now. The group exited the small room, stepping back into the larger concrete space. The metal door was left open behind them, but just before the last officer stepped out, he heard something. A faint sound. He turned his head slightly. From inside the room, a whisper, not the same as before. This one was clearer, closer, right behind him. He froze. Slowly, he turned back toward the doorway. The room was empty. The mattress, the walls, the flickering light, nothing else, no movement, no one there. For a moment he stood completely still, listening. Then the light flickered again, harder this time. And for just a split second, he thought he saw something, a shadow standing in the corner, watching. The light steadied, the corner was empty again. Hey, another officer called from the stairs. Let's go. He didn't respond immediately. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room. The metal door slowly swung behind him, creaking softly as it began to close on its own. And from inside there was one last whisper. The discovery beneath the house on Ashwood Lane changed everything. What had started as a simple welfare check was now a full investigation. Within hours, the property was sealed off with police tape. Forensic teams arrived, along with detectives and city officials. No one treated the house as abandoned anymore. Because it clearly wasn't. Not in the way anyone had believed. The young man found in the basement was taken to the hospital immediately. He was dehydrated, malnourished, and in a fragile mental state. Doctors worked quickly to stabilize him, but they made one thing clear. He had likely been held there for a very long time. Possibly years. When detectives tried to speak with him, he struggled to answer even the simplest questions. His voice was weak, his thoughts scattered. Sometimes he would start speaking, then stop suddenly as if something had interrupted him, something no one else could see. But he did manage to say one name, Daniel Reeves. That was enough for the investigation to begin. Detectives pulled property records for the house on Ashwood Lane. According to official documents, the current owner was listed as Daniel Reeves. At first, that seemed straightforward, until they started digging deeper. There were no recent records tied to the name, no driver's license, no tax filings, no employment history, no known relatives. It was as if the man didn't exist outside of the paperwork connected to that house. That's not possible, one investigator said, staring at the database results. Everyone leaves some kind of trail. Not this one, another replied. They expanded the search. Old records were pulled, physical files stored in city archives. Papers yellowed with age, signatures faded but still visible. And that's when things became even stranger. The house had been sold multiple times over the past 4 decades. Each time, the buyer's name was the same, Daniel Reeves, same spelling, same signature, same handwriting. The first record dated back over 40 years. The most recent one was only 3 years old. It's the same person, one detective said, comparing the documents side by side. That's impossible, another responded. No one's handwriting stays exactly the same for that long. But it had. Every detail matched, every signature, every line. They ran the name through national databases, nothing. No birth certificate, no criminal record, no medical history, no digital footprint at all. It was as if Daniel Reeves had only ever existed on paper, and only in connection to that house. Meanwhile, officers began canvassing the neighborhood. Most residents didn't have much to say. The house had always been quiet. Empty, people had grown used to ignoring it. But one neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived on Ashwood Lane for over 50 years, told a different story. "I've seen him," she said. The officer taking her statement leaned forward slightly. "Who? The man who lives there?" she replied, her voice steady but low. "Daniel, you've seen him recently." She shook her head slowly. "Not recently, but over the years, yes. Can you describe him?" She paused, thinking carefully. "He was tall, thin, always wore dark clothes, never spoke to anyone." "That doesn't sound unusual," the officer said. The woman looked at him directly. "He never changed." The officer hesitated. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly that," she said. "I saw him when I was younger, and I saw him again years later. He looked the same, not older, not different." The officer wrote it down, though he clearly didn't believe it. "He only came at night," she continued, "always alone. I never saw anyone go in with him, and I never saw anyone come out." "Did you ever report it?" She shook her head. "No one would have believed me." The officer closed his notebook. "Thank you for your time." But as he walked away, her final words stayed with him. "He watches that house," she said quietly, "not lives in it, watches it." Back at the station, detectives reviewed old security footage from nearby businesses. It was a long shot, but they needed anything they could find. They started with recent recordings, then went further back. Weeks, months, years. Most of the footage showed nothing unusual: empty streets, passing cars, occasional pedestrians. Then one of the analysts paused the video. "Wait," he said. He zoomed in on a figure walking along the edge of the frame. A man, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing. His face wasn't clear, but his posture, his movement, there was something distinct about it. "Check older footage," a detective said. They pulled recordings from years earlier and found him again. Same walk, same build, same clothes. "Go further back." They did, and again he appeared, in footage from over a decade ago. Unchanged, the room grew quiet. "That's not possible," someone said. No one argued, because they were all seeing the same thing. The timestamps were real. The footage was verified. There was no manipulation, and yet the man in every clip looked exactly the same. No aging, no variation, nothing. The name Daniel Reeves was no longer just a missing person. It was something else entirely. Something that didn't fit any logical explanation. That night, a decision was made. A full search of the property would be conducted again. Every inch of the house, every wall, every foundation point. Because whatever was happening on Ashwood Lane, it was far from over. And somewhere within that house or beneath it, there had to be answers, but no one was prepared for what they would find next. Or what they wouldn't find at all. The second search of the house on Ashwood Lane began just before midnight. This time, nothing was left to chance. Floodlights were set up around the property, casting long, sharp shadows across the yard. Multiple units were present: detectives, forensic teams, structural engineers. Even city officials had arrived to witness what had now become one of the strangest investigations anyone had seen. Inside, the house felt different, heavier, as if it knew it was being watched. The officers moved carefully through each room, documenting everything. Every wall was tapped, every floorboard was checked. Every inch of the structure was examined for hidden spaces or modifications. But everything appeared exactly as it had that morning: old, decayed, empty. until they reached the hallway. The same hallway, the same end of the corridor where the basement door had once stood, only now it wasn't there. The team stopped. No one spoke at first. "That's not possible," one officer said quietly. In front of them was a solid wall. Smooth, unbroken, no doorframe, no handle, no lock, nothing. Just a continuous stretch of old, worn wood paneling that looked like it had always been there. "This is the spot," the first officer insisted. "I know it is." Another stepped forward, running his hand across the surface. "There's no scene, no outline, nothing." "It was here," someone else said. "We all saw it." The tension in the hallway grew thick. Finally, the lead investigator gave the order, "Break it." A heavy tool was brought in. The first defies struck the wall with a loud crack, echoing through the house. Dust fell, the wood splintered, but behind it there was no hollow space, just packed earth. The team paused, then struck again. More wood broke away, exposing a deeper section, still dirt, compact, undisturbed. They continued until a large section of the wall had been removed. Nothing, no staircase, no concrete, no basement, just solid ground, as if the house had never been built over anything at all. Silence filled the hallway. One of the engineers stepped forward, scanning the exposed area carefully. "This hasn't been touched," he said. "There's no sign of excavation, no structural changes. It's original soil." "That's impossible," the detective replied. "We were down there, all of us." The engineer shook his head. "Then wherever you were, it wasn't here." The words didn't make sense, but neither did anything else. For hours they searched. They dug into the floor, breaking through wooden boards and layers of foundation. They checked beneath the house from the outside, bringing in equipment to scan for underground voids. Nothing showed up. No hidden rooms, no tunnels, no concrete structures. No trace of the place they had all stood in just hours before. It was as if the basement had never existed. But there was one thing they couldn't ignore: the young man. He was real, and so was his story. At the hospital, detectives returned to question him again. He was stronger now, though still weak. His voice had improved slightly, but his eyes carried the same fear as before. "Can you tell us what happened down there?" one detective asked gently. The young man stared at his hands for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "There was a door. It began at the bottom of the stairs, just like you saw." The detective said, "What about the man who Daniel Reeves?" At the mention of the name, the young man's expression changed. "He told me that name once," he whispered, "but I don't think it was real." "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Sometimes he would leave," he said, "for hours, maybe days. I couldn't tell. There were no windows, no clocks. Where did he go? I don't know. Did anyone else ever come down there?" The young man shook his head quickly. "No, just him." "What did he do while he was there?" The room grew quiet. The young man swallowed hard. "He watched," he said. "That's all, at first." The detective leaned in slightly. "And after?" The young man looked up. His eyes were filled with something deeper than fear, confusion. "He would ask questions," he said, "about things that hadn't happened yet." The detective frowned. "What kind of things?" "Dates," he replied. "Names, places." He would write them down. "The markings on the wall." The young man nodded. "He told me they mattered." He continued, "That they were connections." "Connections to what?" The young man didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. To other times, the detective sat back, unsure of what to say. "Did he ever hurt you?" another officer asked. The young man shook his head slowly. "No, not like that." "Then why keep you there?" This time the answer came immediately. "He said I was proof." "Proof of what?" "That it worked." The room fell silent. Days later, the house on Ashwood Lane was scheduled for demolition. There was nothing left to investigate, no evidence, no suspect, no explanation. The case was officially classified as unsolved. The young man was released from medical care shortly after, but he refused all further interviews. He disappeared from public record not long after, and the name Daniel Reeves was never found again. The house was torn down completely. In its place, a new foundation was planned. Construction began weeks later. For a while, everything seemed normal. Until the digging started. Heavy machinery broke through the top layers of soil, clearing space for the new structure. Workers moved quickly, following standard procedures. Then one of the machines stopped. The operator stepped out, confused. "I hit something," he said. The crew gathered around as they cleared away the dirt by hand. Slowly, a flat surface was revealed. Concrete, smooth, solid, too precise to be natural. The workers exchanged uneasy looks. "That shouldn't be here," one of them muttered. They called it in. Hours later, a small team returned to examine the find. Carefully, they broke through the surface. Beneath it, a hollow space, dark, cold air rising from below. One of the workers shined a flashlight inside and froze. "There's a door," he said. The others moved closer. There it was, a metal door, identical to the one described in the reports. Heavy, sealed, locked from the outside. No one spoke. Then from beneath the ground a sound, faint, weak but unmistakable. A whisper, the same whisper, waiting, still there.